Chapter 7. Collecting the ingredients and preparing them for the smoke mixture formed a yearly cycle. The first year, Don Juan taught me the procedure. In December of 1962, the second year, when the cycle was renewed, Don Juan merely directed me. I collected the ingredients myself, prepared them, and put them away until the next year. In December 1963, a new cycle started for the third time. Don Juan then showed me how to combine the dried ingredients I had collected and prepared the year before. He put the smoky mixture into a small leather bag, and we set it out once again to collect the different components for the following year. Don Juan seldom mentioned the little smoke during the year that elapsed between the two gatherings. Every time I went to see him, however, he gave me his pipe to hold, and the procedure of getting familiar with the pipe developed in the way he had described. He put the pipe in my hands very gradually. He demanded absolute and careful concentration on that action, and gave me very explicit directions. Any fumbling with the pipe would inevitably result in his or my death, he said. As soon as we had finished the third collecting and preparing cycle, Don Juan began to talk about the smoke as an ally for the first time in more than a year. Monday, December 23rd, 1963. We were driving back to his house after collecting some yellow flowers for the mixture. They were one of the necessary ingredients. I made the remark that this year we did not follow the same order in collecting the ingredients as we had the year before. He laughed and said the smoke was not moody or petty as the devil's weed was. For the smoke, the order of collecting was unimportant. All that was required was that the man using the mixture had to be accurate and exact. I asked Don Juan what we were going to do with the mixture he had prepared and given me to keep. He replied that it was mine, and added that I had to use it as soon as possible. I asked how much of it was needed each time. The small bag he had given me contained approximately 3 times the amount a small tobacco bag would hold. He told me I would have to use all the contents of my bag in 1 year, and how much I needed each time I smoked was a personal matter. I wanted to know what would happen if I never finished the bag. Don Juan said that nothing would happen. The smoke did not require anything. He himself did not need to smoke any more, and yet he made a new mixture each year. He then corrected himself and said that he rarely had to smoke. I asked what he did with the unused mixture, but he did not answer. He said the mixture was no longer good if not used in 1 year. At this point, we got into a long argument. I did not phrase my questions correctly, and his answers seemed confusing. I wanted to know if the mixture would lose its hallucinogenic properties or power after a year, thus making the yearly cycle necessary. But he insisted that the mixture would not lose its power at any time. The only thing that happened, he said, was that a man did not need it anymore because he had made a new supply. He had to dispose of the remaining old mixture in a specific way, which Don Juan did not want to reveal to me at that point. Tuesday, December 24th, 1963. You said, Don Juan, you don't have to smoke anymore. Yes, because the smoke is my ally. I don't need to smoke anymore. I can call him anytime, any place. Do you mean he comes to you even if you do not smoke? I mean I go to him freely. Will I be able to do that too? If you succeed in getting him as your ally, you will. Tuesday, December 31st, 1963. On Thursday, December 26th, I had my first experience with Don Juan's ally, the smoke. All day I drove him around and did chores for him. We returned to his house in the later afternoon. I mentioned that we had nothing to eat all day. He was completely unconcerned over that. Instead, he began to tell me it was imperative for me to become familiar with the smoke. He said I had to experience it myself to realize how important it was as an ally. Without giving me an opportunity to say anything, Don Juan told me he was going to light his pipe for me, right then. I tried to dissuade him, arguing that I did not believe I was ready. I told him I felt I had not handled the pipe for a long enough time, but he said there was not much time left for me to learn, and I had to use the pipe very soon. He brought the pipe out of its sack and fondled it. I sat on the floor next to him and frantically tried to get sick and pass out, to do anything to put off this unavoidable step. The room was almost dark. Don Juan had lighted the kerosene lamp and placed it in a corner. Usually the lamp kept the room in a relaxing semi-darkness, its yellowish light always soothing. This time, however, the light seemed dim and unusually red. It was unnerving. He untied his small bag of mixture without removing it from the cord fastened around his neck. He brought the pipe close to him, put it inside his shirt, and poured some of the mixture into the bowl. He made me watch the procedure, pointing out that if some of the mixture spilled, it would fall inside his shirt. Don Juan filled 3/4 of the bowl, then tied the bag with one hand while holding the pipe in the other. He picked up a small clay dish, handed it to me, and asked me to get some small charcoals from the fire outside. I went to the back of the house and scooped a bunch of charcoals from the adobe stove. I hurried back to his room. I felt deep anxiety. It was like a premonition. I sat next to Don Juan and gave him the dish. He looked at it and calmly said the charcoals were too big. He wanted smaller ones that would fit inside the pipe bowl. I went back to the stove and got some. He took the new dish of charcoals and put it before him. He was sitting with his legs crossed and tucked under him. He glanced at me out of the corner of his eye and leaned forward until his chin nearly touched the charcoals. He held the pipe in his left hand and with an extremely swift movement of his right hand picked up a burning piece of charcoal and put it into the bowl of the pipe. Then he sat up straight and holding the pipe with both hands, put it to his mouth and puffed 3 times. He stretched his arms to me and told me in a forceful whisper to take the pipe with both hands and smoke. The thought of refusing the pipe and running away crossed my mind for an instant. But Don Juan demanded again, still in a whisper, that I take the pipe and smoke. I looked at him. His eyes were fixed on me, but his stare was friendly, concerned. It was clear that I had made the choice a long time before. There was no alternative but to do what he said. I took the pipe and nearly dropped it. It was hot. I put it to my mouth with extreme care because I imagined its heat would be intolerable on my lips, but I felt no heat at all. Don Juan told me to inhale. The smoke flowed into my mouth and seemed to circulate there. It was heavy. I felt as though I had a mouthful of dough. The simile occurred to me although I had never had a mouthful of dough. The smoke was also like menthol, and the inside of my mouth suddenly became cold. It was a refreshing sensation. Again, I heard Don Juan whispering. I felt the smoke seep inside my body freely, almost without my control. I needed no more urging from Don Juan. Mechanically, I kept inhaling. Suddenly, Don Juan leaned over and took the pipe from my hands. He tapped the ashes gently on the dish with the charcoals. Then he wet his finger with saliva and rotated it inside the bowl to clean its sides. He blew through the stem repeatedly. I saw him put the pipe back into its sheath. His actions held my interest. When he had finished cleaning the pipe and putting it away, he stared at me, and I realized for the first time that my whole body was numb, mentholated. My face felt heavy and my jaws hurt. I could not keep my mouth closed, but there was no saliva flow. My mouth was burning dry, and yet I was not thirsty. I began to sense an unusual heat all over my head, a cold heat. My breath seemed to cut my nostrils and upper lip every time I exhaled, but it didn't burn. It hurt like a piece of ice. Don Juan sat next to me, to my right, and without moving held the pipe sheath against the floor as though keeping it down by force. My hands were heavy. My arms sagged, pulling my shoulders down. My nose was running. I wiped it with the back of my hand, and my upper lip was rubbed off. I wiped my face, and all the flesh was wiped off. I was melting. I felt as if my flesh was actually melting. I jumped to my feet and tried to grab hold of something, anything, with which to support myself. I was experiencing a terror I had never felt before. I held onto a pole that Don Juan keeps stuck on the floor in the center of his room. I stood there for a moment. Then I turned to look at him. He was still, sitting motionless, holding his pipe, staring at me. My breath was painfully hot, or cold. It was choking me. I bent my head forward to rest it on the pole, but apparently I missed it, and my head kept on moving downward beyond the point where the pole was. I stopped when I was nearly down to the floor. I pulled myself up. The pole was there in front of my eyes. I tried again to rest my head on it. I tried to control myself and to be aware, and kept my eyes open as I leaned forward to touch the pole with my forehead. It was a few inches from my eyes, but as I put my head against it, I had the queerest feeling that I was going right through it. In a desperate search for a rational explanation, I concluded that my eyes were distorting depth, and that the pole must have been 10 feet away, even though I saw it directly in front of my face. I then conceived a logical, rational way to check the position of the pole. I began moving sideways around it, one little step at a time. My argument was that in walking around the pole in that way, I couldn't possibly make a circle more than 5 feet in diameter. If the pole was really 10 feet away from me, or beyond my reach, a moment would come when I would have my back to it. I trusted that at that moment the pole would vanish, because in reality it would be behind me. I then proceeded to circle the pole, but it remained in front of my eyes as I went around it. In a fit of frustration, I grabbed it with both hands, but my hands went through it. I was grabbing the air. I carefully calculated the distance between the pole and myself. I figured it must be 3 feet. That is, my eyes perceived it as 3 feet. I played for a moment with the perception of depth by moving my head from one side to the other, focusing each eye in turn on the pole and then on the background. According to my way of judging depth, the pole was unmistakably before me, possibly 3 feet away. Stretching out my arms to protect my head, I charged with all my strength. The sensation was the same. I went through the pole. This time I went all the way to the floor. I stood up again, and standing up was perhaps the most unusual of all the acts I performed that night. I thought myself up. In order to get up, I did not use my muscles and skeletal frame in the way I am accustomed to doing, because I no longer had control over them. I knew at the instant I hit the ground, but my curiosity about the pole was so strong, I thought myself up in a kind of reflex action. And before I fully realized I could not move, I was up. I called to Don Juan for help. At one moment I yelled frantically at the top of my voice, but Don Juan did not move. He kept on looking at me, sideways, as though he didn't want to turn his head to face me fully. I took a step toward him, but instead of moving forward, I staggered backward and fell against the wall. I knew I had rammed against it with my back, yet it did not feel hard. I was completely suspended in a soft, spongy substance. It was the wall. My arms were stretched out laterally, and slowly my whole body seemed to sink into the wall. I could only look forward into the room. Don Juan was still watching me, but he made no move to help me. I made a supreme effort to jerk my body out of the wall, but it only sank deeper and deeper. In the midst of indescribable terror, I felt that the spongy wall was closing in on my face. I tried to shut my eyes, but they were fixed open. I don't remember what else happened. Suddenly Don Juan was in front of me, a short distance away. We were in the other room. I saw his table and the dirt stove with the fire burning, and with the corner of my eye I distinguished the fence outside the house. I could see everything very clearly. Don Juan had brought the kerosene lantern and hung it from the beam in the middle of the room. I tried to look in a different direction, but my eyes were set to see only straight forward. I couldn't distinguish or feel any part of my body. My breathing was undetectable, but my thoughts were extremely lucid. I was clearly aware of whatever was taking place in front of me. Don Juan walked toward me, and my clarity of mind ended. Something seemed to stop inside me. There were no more thoughts. I saw Don Juan coming, and I hated him. I wanted to tear him apart. I could have killed him then, but I could not move. At first, I vaguely sensed a pressure on my head, but it also disappeared. There was only one thing left, an overwhelming anger at Don Juan. I saw him only a few inches from me. I wanted to claw him apart. I felt I was groaning. Something in me began to convulse. I heard Don Juan talking to me. His voice was soft and soothing, and I felt infinitely pleasing. He came even closer and started to recite a Spanish lullaby. Lady Saint Anna, why does the baby cry? For an apple he has lost. I will give you one. I will give you two, one for the boy and one for you. Señora Santa Ana, ¿por qué llora el niño? ¿Por una manzana que se le ha perdido? Yo le daré una, yo le daré dos, una para el niño y otro para vos. A warmth pervaded me. It was a warmth of heart and feelings. Don Juan's words were a distant echo. They recalled the forgotten memories of childhood. The violence I had felt before disappeared. The resentment changed into a longing, a joyous affection for Don Juan. He said I must struggle not to fall asleep, that I no longer had a body and was free to turn into anything I wanted. He stepped back. My eyes were at a normal level as though I were standing in front of him. He extended both his arms towards me and told me to come inside them. Either I moved forward or he came closer to me. His hands were almost on my face, on my eyes, although I did not feel them. Get inside my chest, I heard him say. I felt I was engulfing him. It was the same sensation of the sponginess of the wall. Then I could hear only his voice commanding me to look and see. I could not distinguish him any more. My eyes were apparently open, for I saw flashes of light on a red field. It was as though I was looking at a light through my closed eyelids. Then my thoughts were turned on again. They came back in a fast barrage of images, faces, scenery. Scenes without any coherence popped up and disappeared. It was like a fast dream in which images overlap and change. Then the thoughts began to diminish in number and intensity, and soon they were gone again. There was only an awareness of affection, of being happy. I couldn't distinguish any shapes or light. All of a sudden, I was pulled up. I distinctly felt I was being lifted, and I was free, moving with tremendous lightness and speed in water or air. I swam like an eel. I contorted and twisted and soared up and down at will. I felt a cold wind blowing all around me, and I began to float like a feather back and forth, down and down and down. Saturday, December 28th, 1963. I woke up yesterday late in the afternoon. Don Juan told me I had slept peacefully for nearly 2 days. I had a splitting headache. I drank some water and got sick. I felt tired, extremely tired, and after eating I went back to sleep. Today I felt perfectly relaxed again. Don Juan and I talked about my experience with the little smoke. Thinking that he wanted me to tell the whole story the way I always did, I began to describe my impressions, but he stopped me and said it was not necessary. He told me I had really not done anything, and that I had fallen asleep right away, so there was nothing to talk about. How about the way I felt? Isn't that important at all? I insisted. No, not with the smoke. Later on, when you learn how to travel, we will talk. When you learn how to get into things. Does one really get into things? Don't you remember? You went into and through that wall. I think I really went out of my mind. No, you didn't. Did you behave the same way I did when you smoked for the first time, Don Juan? No, it wasn't the same. We have different characters. How did you behave? Don Juan did not answer. I rephrased the question and asked it again, but he said he did not remember his experiences, and that my question was comparable to asking a fisherman how he felt the first time he fished. He said the smoke as an ally was unique, and I reminded him that he had also said Mescalito was unique. He argued that each was unique, but that they differed in quality. Mescalito is a protector because he talks to you and can guide your acts, he said. Mescalito teaches the right way to live, and you can see him because he is outside you. The smoke, on the other hand, is an ally. It transforms you and gives you power without ever showing its presence. You can't talk to it, but you know it exists because it takes your body away and makes you light as air. Yet you never see it. But it is there, giving you power to accomplish unimaginable things, such as when it takes your body away. I really felt I had lost my body, Don Juan. You did. You mean I really didn't have a body? What do you think yourself? Well, I don't know. All I can tell you is what I felt. That is all there is in reality, what you felt. But how did you see me, Don Juan? How did I appear to you? How I saw you does not matter. It is like the time when you grabbed the pole. You felt it was not there, and you went around it to make sure it was there. But when you jumped at it, you felt again that it was not really there. But you saw me as I am now, didn't you? No, you were not as you are now. True, I admit that. But I had my body, didn't I? Although I couldn't feel it? No, goddammit. You did not have a body like the body you have today. What happened to my body then? I thought you understood. The little smoke took your body. But where did it go? How in the hell do you expect me to know that? It was useless to persist in trying to get a rational explanation. I told him I did not want to argue or to ask stupid questions, but if I accepted the idea that it was possible to lose my body, I would lose all my rationality. He said that I was exaggerating as usual, and that I did not, nor was I going to lose anything because of the little smoke. Tuesday, January 28th, 1964. I asked Don Juan what he thought of the idea of giving the smoke to anyone who wanted the experience. He indignantly replied that to give the smoke to anyone would be just the same as killing him, for he would have no one to guide him. I asked Don Juan to explain what he meant. He said I was there, alive, and talking to him because he had brought me back. He had restored my body. Without him, I would never have awakened. How did you restore my body, Don Juan? You will learn that later, but you will have to learn to do it all by yourself. That is the reason I want you to learn as much as you can while I am still around. You have wasted enough time asking stupid questions about nonsense, but perhaps it is not in your destiny to learn all about the little smoke. Well, what shall I do then? Let the smoke teach you as much as you can learn. Does the smoke also teach? Of course it teaches. Does it teach as Mezcalito does? No, it is not a teacher as Mezcalito is. It does not show the same things. But what does the smoke teach then? It shows you how to handle its power and to learn that you must take it as many times as you can. Your ally is very frightening, Don Juan. It was unlike anything I ever experienced before. I thought I had lost my mind. For some reason, this was the most poignant image that came to my mind. I viewed the total event from the peculiar stand of having had other hallucinogenic experiences from which to draw a comparison, and the only thing that occurred to me over and over again was that with the smoke, one loses one's mind. Don Juan discarded my simile, saying that what I felt was its unimaginable power. And to handle that power, he said, one has to live a strong life. The idea of the strong life not only pertains to the preparation period, but also entails the attitude of the man after the experience. He said that smoke is so strong, one can match it only with strength. Otherwise, one's life would be shattered to bits. I asked him if the smoke had the same effect on everyone. He said it produced a transformation, but not in everyone. Then, what is the special reason the smoke produced the transformation in me? I asked. That, I think, is a very silly question. You have followed obediently every step required. It is no mystery that the smoke transformed you. I asked him again to tell me about my appearance. I wanted to know how I looked, for the image of a bodiless being he had planted in my mind was understandably unbearable. He said that to tell the truth, he was afraid to look at me. He felt the same way his benefactor must have felt when he saw Don Juan smoking for the first time. Why were you afraid? Was I that frightening? I asked. I had never seen anyone smoking before. Didn't you see your benefactor smoke? No. You have never seen even yourself? How could I? You could smoke in front of a mirror. He did not answer but stared at me and shook his head. I asked him again if it was possible to look into a mirror. He said it would be possible, although it would be useless because one would probably die of fright, if of nothing else. I said, then one must look frightful. I have wondered all my life about the same thing, he said. Yet I did not ask, nor did I look into a mirror. I did not even think of that. How can I find out then? You will have to wait the same way I did, until you give the smoke to someone else, if you ever master it, of course. Then you will see how a man looks. That is the rule. What would happen if I smoked in front of a camera and took a picture of myself? I don't know. The smoke would probably turn against you, but I suppose you find it so harmless you feel you can play with it. I told him I did not mean to play, but that he had told me before that the smoke did not require steps, and I thought there would be no harm in wanting to know how one looked. He corrected me, saying that he had meant there was no necessity to follow a specific order, as there is with the devil's weed. All that was needed with the smoke was the proper attitude, he said. From that point of view, one had to be exact in following the rule. He gave me an example, explaining that it did not matter what ingredient for the mixture was picked first, so long as the amount was correct. I asked if there would be any harm in my telling others about my experience. He replied that the only secrets never to be revealed were how to make the mixture, how to move around, and how to return. Other matters concerning the subject were of no importance.